Today we want to talk about what we know about learners and learning. Okay? Yesterday we talked a bit about learning-oriented assessment, and this was one of the definitions we had. It involves a collection and interpretation of evidence about performance so that judgments can be made about further language development to promote learning. And yesterday we thought about how in the classroom context, perhaps one of the most telling ways that we could figure out whether we have a learning-oriented approach is what we think of at the end of the day after teaching. We said that at the end of the day after teaching, are we more likely to think, today what I taught was ... or are we more likely to think, today what my student learned was ... And I suspect if you're anything like me, you probably are thinking of the former rather than the latter, which probably I think tells us a lot about whether we are being learner and learning oriented. Okay? That's the classroom level. And then on the more macro level, we did say that if we have a good basis for, if we have a good theoretically motivated basis for constructing a series of exams or syllabuses, then it could provide a very good basis for the overall language development of a learner. So you do have the classroom, which happens in here, which is the micro level. And over here, you do have the CFR with the can-do statements. And if you further develop that with a good theory behind it about what we're actually learning, you could actually develop pretty good syllabuses so that someone who is learning from you could keep moving up until they reach full proficiency. Okay? Now, yesterday, I basically just asserted that the socio-cognitive approach is the better way to go. Okay? And we were talking basically about teaching and learning in the macro and the micro. And today, I'd like to go into the nano, if you would. That is what's happening inside the brain of the learner. Okay? Now, there's some grammatical type evidence that we see once in a while. For example, the prefix RE, which we all know is about, doing something again. And you would see a series of sentences such as this, for example, and you and I can immediately figure out that restarted the car is fine, repetted the dog is not okay, and repainted the room is okay, but reslept is not okay. Okay? If I tried to tell you to explain why two of them are okay and two of them are not okay, you're probably going to stammer and stumble and not be able to do it for me. Okay? Now, there are people who take this to mean that, we just have an intuitive sense of what is grammatical and not grammatical, and when we can't explain it, and therefore, by definition, that there is something in our brains, a module in our brain, that specifically focuses on grammar. Okay? Sometimes we also see the fact that, children produce, even L1 children produce things like eaten or goed, which we know are incorrect. And the people who think that there's a specific grammatical apparatus inside our heads would say, well, this is just parameter setting. Okay? In the same way that if you buy a new laptop, you have to set it up, and so that your email will always come with this particular background and so on and so forth. And once you set the parameters up, then it's going to be okay forever. Okay? So these people say, well, the reason why there has to be a grammatical apparatus is because you actually never encounter enough of these new expressions. So how do you learn it? Okay? Or, for example, that you don't encounter enough negative evidence about incorrect things you produce, so how did you learn them? And therefore, you have a grammatical apparatus. Okay? What I'd like us to do today is to think a little bit more about this and think whether there might be a simpler explanation for things. Okay? And if you have a pen, I'd like you to take it out because, of course, being in the assessment business, I like giving questions. So if you have a pen, I'd like you to write out your answer for this question as quickly as you can, okay? Don't think about it. Write it as quickly as you can. I promise it's not actually a lot of writing. Are you ready? Here's the question. Okay, are you done? How many people think that the vowel in the alphabet that's most frequently used in the English language is A? Okay, a small smattering of people. E? Wow. Could you look around? No, hold your hands up. Could you look around? I? O? U? Huh. Did someone leak the papers, or have you been preparing for this test, that all of you knew that the correct answer was E? Here's the next question. Okay. In fact, this is not the next question. In fact, in English as a whole, you see that the letter E, once you have a collection of of any size of English text, you'll find that this is the frequency in which you find letters appearing. And in newspapers, this would be what it is. In Wikipedia, this is what it is. If you look in fiction, this would be what it is. Okay. And there will be minor variations, of course. So for example, you will see that I is slightly less frequent in newspapers because obviously journalists are not supposed to take the first person point of view, so I will not appear quite as often. You'll find that W jump a few places in Wikipedia. I wonder why, because at the beginning of every single Wikipedia page is the word wiki, so W actually shows up more often. But otherwise, in general, that's always how it goes. And E is the most frequently used vowel, okay? And you came up with it without even thinking about it. Okay, here's the next question. Which two-letter combination given below occurs most frequently in English words? Okay, write this down. And before we give the game away, here's the next question. Which one occurs least frequently? Okay, for most frequently, people who think it's XY. Two people, and it's a couple. Least, most. XY, most. TH? Wow. CO? SA? Huh. The way you guys are acting, it's like a North Korean election, If only the United States, had something like this going. The least frequent, XY, TH, CO, SA. Very interesting, okay? Again, I don't know how much studying you've been doing of two-letter combinations in the English language, but for some reason, without even thinking about it, all of you know which ones are the most frequent and the less frequent. Okay? For some reason, it appears that we are actually very good at figuring out frequency information. Okay? For some reason. Okay, here's my next question. I'm going to show you a sentence, but the last word is missing. The last word is a three-letter word. It's missing. I'd like you to supply the last word for me. Okay? Okay, it's just three letters, so you should be done by now. Can someone tell me what word you put in? You made me cry. Okay, now this is very interesting because if you look in a corpus of English language, the word try is actually 10 times more frequent than the word cry. Okay? But something in you knows that the word to put in there is cry because something in you knows that when you have the phrase "you made me" in there, okay, the more likely word to follow it would be one that is emotional. Okay, you made me cry. You made me happy. You made me angry. You made me sad. You made me blush, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we're not only very good at figuring out frequency information, we're also very good at figuring out contextual information. Okay, and if you think about it, this is actually another kind of frequency information. It is that with these particular words in place, this is the most frequent, most likely next word that's going to come up. Okay, and in fact, it's not just frequency and context; it's also recency. Okay, I don't know if you remember in yesterday's talk, I put in the pizza delivery thing. Okay, I actually haven't had pizza in quite a long time. But then Lori's team, when they're setting up for this seminar, on the night before, they always have a pizza dinner. So the staff was actually contacting me whether I was going to join the pizza dinner. Okay, so suddenly, without realizing it, I'd put in the pizza dinner into my slides. And you know what I had for dinner just before I flew over here for the seminar? Pizza. Okay, so I'm really sick of pizza by now, but there is something about recency that makes us want to use words more often because we've just heard it. Okay, and I'm sure you yourself can think of examples of your own of that happening. Okay, and if you think about it, recency is another type of frequency information. It's to say, you know, all things being equal, now that we've been talking about this particular subject, then these words are more likely to show up. Okay? So there are people who say that we don't actually hear enough words to be able to figure out things grammatically. How many words do we actually hear? Any guesses? Let's say per hour. If you keep standing up there, well, a lot more than usual. There are actually these researchers who went into people's homes regularly for about 7 months. Okay? And they figured out that, in fact, the number of words you hear does differ depending, for example, on your socioeconomic status. Okay? So for people who come from high SES homes, they hear around 2,000 words an hour. Okay? And people from a lower SES backgrounds, they hear about 600 words an hour in their homes. Okay? And if you and they try to extrapolate, if you're actually awake for 14 hours each day, let's say from the time you were a baby, this is kind of what you'll end up seeing. Okay? That by the time you're actually 3 years old, you'd probably have heard, if you're a high SES kid, probably over 30 million words. And even if you come from a low SES family, you've already heard probably somewhere in the region of about 10 million words. Okay? Now you know that for a lot of the corpora that we have, even for about 10,000 or a couple of 100,000 words, you could figure out the regularities in language in there. Okay? And if you think about children hearing 30 million words, is that enough for them to figure out the language? Probably quite a lot. Okay? And if you hear 30 million words, you soon figure out letter E is the most frequently occurring vowel, TH is the most frequently occurring bigram in words, and so on and so forth. Okay? What do you think this particular picture is? It's my art project. Okay? This particular picture is actually showing you what we call a ZIF distribution, or for that matter, it brings to mind the Pareto Principle. Okay? That is to say that there are many things out there in the real world that will follow this kind of distribution, where the most frequent thing will occur twice as often as the next one, 3 times as frequently as the third one, and so on and so forth. And it very quickly develops a long tail. Okay? And because this is a very natural distribution you see in the world, about 80% of 20% of the most frequent things tend to account for 80% of your distribution. Okay? This is true in a lot of places. Okay? If you have the time, go home and line up all the files you have in your laptop. Okay? And I can tell you that the 20% of your biggest files will account for 80% of the space taken up in your hard drive. Okay? Or to put it in better terms, Herbert has written a lot of books. Okay? He hasn't sat down and figured this out yet. Okay? But the top 20% of his books in terms of sales is making him 80% of his royalties. Okay? Or, or for that matter, Cambridge English offers a lot of exams, but the 20% of the exams accounts for 80% of the test takers. Okay? You'll see that in lots of places where you go. And funnily enough, language is another one of those things. Okay? The 20% most frequent words in the English language, or even in any other language you'll find, will account for 80% of any given text you find. Okay? It's an amazing thing. And so it's not just frequency that makes it possible for us to easily learn language. It's the fact that language actually takes on this particular distribution, okay? Because in fact, if every single word we use was used equally frequently across the board, we'd probably never learn language. Okay? I was just at Bletchley Park last Monday, the place in the UK where the code breakers were working. And it was a lot of fun because I saw in one particular exhibit, under glass, a word list. Okay? Linguists, we care about word lists. And it was a word list of them arranged according to the most frequently used German words. Okay? And if language was not like this, the code breakers would never have figured out what those encrypted messages were. Okay? But they knew, for example, that the word weather was very frequent in German military dispatches. And so they could reasonably guess, what if this word today is in fact the word for weather, and so on and so forth. And that made it possible for them to break the code. Okay? Kid, you probably at some point, were standing next to your mom in the kitchen and, don't touch the fire, it's not good for you. And you touch the fire and ooh, ow, ooh, that hurts. And then, you go over into the living room and you start realizing with your fireplace, yes, don't touch that thing, right? It's not exactly the same thing, but it's similar. And you and I know how to extend the principle. Why should that not be true for language learning as well? Now, there are some people who think of grammar as being a specific module as well that says you don't get enough disconfirming evidence saying that, the things you produce that are wrong are wrong. Okay? Now, some of you in this room are actually parents. Okay? And if you're parents, you must have encountered something like this before in your life. All right? In fact, you know that the harder they wail, the more unreasonable their demands. And you learn after a time that you don't actually need to actually say anything, right? Because just by simply ignoring it, at some point, the kid will figure out that, nope, I'm not getting that toy, I'm not getting that candy, or whatever else it is. Okay? We don't have to be so, credulous, At the end of the day, you don't actually need explicit evidence telling you you were wrong. You just need enough people ignoring you when you keep saying ated, and goed, and so on and so forth. Okay? And in fact, you and I know that if you are a parent, when they say ated, eated, you say, oh, you mean ate. In fact, you don't even just do that. Say ate. Okay? You speak motherese, where you have all these exaggerated contours to your pronunciation so that they could actually learn things. Okay? In other words, do you actually need a grammar-specific device? If you look at the evidence, you don't. Okay? We have a very highly efficient brain, as Herbert was trying to say, and we actually learn a lot of things implicitly. Okay? And by frequency and context and recency, because we keep going through these things, we end up developing automaticity, so that when you're reading a book nowadays, you don't say English. You just say it automatically. Okay? I had a very interesting experience about 2 years ago, because after having driven for over 20-something years, I had to go get a British license, and so I went and got myself driving lessons. Okay? And it was very funny because, driving had become automatic for me, but the driving instructor wanted me to turn it into a step-by-step process. Okay? He even wanted me to come up with mnemonics, and Herbert had some things to say about I can't even pronounce the word, yesterday. So for example, he tried to teach me smog. Okay? Smog apparently means, I have to check this one because I've forgotten about it already. S means signal, M means mirror, O is over the shoulder. Who was your instructor? As you realize, if I was sitting there and finding this is very difficult because cognitively I have to process this, okay? Because we do have a brain that processes things implicitly, but there's also a kind of learning from a different part of our brain that's about consciously paying attention to things. And then I had to think, well, first, what's the word? And then, okay, smog. Are you trying to just make me think about my carbon footprint? No, It represents something, and S is, oh yes, signal. M is mirror. O is okay. Time to go. No, it's over the shoulder, and G is go. Okay, it actually slows down the whole thing. And if you think about it, thinking, really, is like rocks. It's hard. Okay, and at some point, it makes you want to scream like this. Okay, which is why, if you think about it, yesterday, Herbert told you that one of the highest utility learning methods out there is where you actually space out your practice of things, okay? Because at some point, when your brain is going like this, there's no point in continuing, okay? You need to take a break, go into the tub, and that's when you have your Archimedes eureka moment, okay? Right. I'm going to show you a picture. There are people in there, and there's someone talking, and the first person who can think of the correct answer of what the guy is saying, just shout it out loud, okay? Wow, it's all the women doing it. There's clearly something about a leap year that makes women want to ask the question, will you marry me? Very interesting, okay? Nobody said, whilst thou do me the favor of marrying me. Nobody just said, let's get hitched. Or, if you want principles of efficiency, marry me. Very interesting. Look what I found. I'm sure there's a Japanese haiku about, just finding random diamonds as you're, riding your horse through hell, okay? Very interesting, okay? Without even a moment's thinking, you came up with, will you marry me? Okay, let's leave that for the moment, okay? For many years when I was growing up, the tallest building in the world was the Sears Tower. Okay, so I kept hearing Sears Tower, Sears Tower, Sears Tower, Sears Tower, Sears Tower, and so on and so forth. Okay, in 2002, I moved to the United States to study at the University of Michigan, where clearly academic pursuits are the most important thing. And I started shopping once in a while in this particular store called Sears because they have very cheap, socks and whatnot. Interestingly, it wasn't until 2006 that I figured out that this Sears Tower had anything to do with that Sears department store, okay? Now, I know the correct answer to the question could well just be that I'm really slow. But so that nobody has to leave this meeting room feeling bad about themselves, could someone give me an alternate explanation of why it took that much time for me to figure out the relationship? Okay, don't murmur because, murmur is for, people who are not sure of their answers. Come on, be brave. Raise your hand and maybe say it out loud. Different context. What do you mean by that? Okay, it was a different country, though I did know that both of them were in the United States. But I know what you're trying to say there. Say some more. No, I don't want to, you've embarrassed me in front of everyone. Because all my life, I've been thinking Sears Tower, Sears Tower, Sears Tower, Sears Tower, and I'm thinking in terms of big buildings. Okay, that has nothing to do with socks, right? Now the question is, if that's the case, why is it that later on I figured out that they had a relationship with one another? Thank you very much. I think I'll take that and move on. I realize the concept that sometimes they do name buildings after people. Yep, that was one possibility because later on they started naming things after companies and whatnot. Could there be other reasons as well? The logo is not the same. Sears Tower is just a complete black box. Well, several black boxes. Well, yesterday, my wait time is done. Yesterday, Herbert showed you a picture of some fashion, which I've colored blue instead, because, blue is my color. And this is a picture of our brains, the insides of it. And Herbert told you, what are these little things in here? Neurons, right? There are about 100 billion neurons inside our brain. Okay, and what else Herbert told us? Our brain's memory is not like it's not like a container, okay? The way we remember things is not like a hard drive where it stores it in a particular place, if you would, or like a library where you put it in a particular shelf and you have to go there to retrieve it, okay? The thing about our brains is actually more that if you're actually saying things like Sears Tower, you're actually sending signals between a neuron and another, but it's not just one particular pathway. Okay? It will be several of them associated with the big building one will light up when I talk about Sears Tower, and the linguistic one, and probably something about, you know, words that end in ear, and, you know, words that have vowels of E, and so on and so forth. Okay? And the more that you actually keep doing that, it strengthens the connections between those particular neural pathways. Okay? What they say is that neurons that fire together bind together. Okay? So the stronger those pathways become, the harder it is for some alternate pathway to come in. Okay? But if you think about it, after I moved to the United States, I had a couple of years. So the binding is very strong for Sears Tower with tall buildings. Okay? But after I was in the United States and I was seeing week in, week out, Sears, 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 there's another part of my brain that's just saying Sears department store, but it's also saying, you know, words that end with ear, and so on and so forth. And over time, it started developing equal strength, such that at one particular point in time, it tips over, and I realized that, oh, I could now separate Sears Tower, Sears from Tower, and then Sears with Sears can go together. And that's how I figured it out. Okay? In other words, originally, my brain was storing Sears Tower, stores in quotes, as a chunk. Okay? Now, if you think about it, here's one other thing for you about the brain. Do you know what happens in your brain when you kick a ball? I'll tell you the answer. A particular part of your brain lights up. Okay? Here's the next question. What happens in your brain when you say kick? The same part of your brain lights up. Okay? Now, take a look at all the evidence I've shown you, okay? Which is that somewhere in your brain, you're remembering single-letter frequencies. You're also remembering two-letter frequencies. You're also storing things as chunks. Will you marry me rather than marry me? Okay, I've done you one better, Herbert. You just got kisses. I'm getting someone to marry me. You store chunks like Sears Tower, and your brain actually works in such a way that saying the word and performing the action of the word is exactly the same part of your brain lighting up. I think if you take all of that together, it would argue very strongly against having a grammar-specific component in your brain, because clearly our brain is very multimodal. Okay? Remember Herbert saying yesterday about multisensory activities? Yeah? Our brain is very multimodal. So I think that actually argues against the idea of grammar specificities. While we're talking about tall buildings, here's a picture of another city with tall buildings. If you go there and meet the locals, what would they say their city is called? Oh no, Lori, I'm very disappointed in you. In fact, I've been told that the locals never call their city the Big Apple. It's only the tourists who ever call it that. But in fact, what do they call their city? This sounds like a trick question, so nobody wants to answer it. What do they say? I think I heard the correct answer. Not Gotham City. Gotham City is actually Chicago. Pardon? We're pushing this too hard. What is this place called? How did you say that? Ah, I love the people who were trying to make a scene there. This is what they say, New York, right? They never say New York, okay? Frank Sinatra might do it in the song, but that's different, okay? New York. Okay? Why do they do that? Is that just to confuse us? Nope. Okay? The reason why it's New York is because the more often you use a word, It's too much effort to actually spell it out completely. And the more you use it, the more quickly you end up retrieving it in your brain because the neural pathways are very strong. And so what happens is they actually very quickly get reduced. Okay? And when they get reduced, some of their features become eroded, and suddenly it becomes harder to figure out, oh, it was New York. There was a city called York in the old world, and now there's a New York. Okay? In fact, that happens all the time, you know, with the word let us, let's, and with the word going to, gonna, and let's do it the other way around, will. I'm told this might potentially have Germanic roots, willen, which means, you know, a desire or something. Okay, now it's very interesting because there's something that happens when words get reduced. Okay? Originally, the word let us just means, will you allow us? And after it gets reduced, you're able to use let's to mean making a suggestion to do something. Going to was not very frequent. In fact, Shakespeare wrote about 850,000 words, and he used the phrase going to only 6 times. Okay? Today, if you take a corpus of the same size, the word going to will be in there about 1,800 times. Okay? And so because it's used a lot, it ended up becoming gonna. And from going to, as to mean physically going from one place to another, gonna ended up meaning these are our future plans. Do you see the meaning has changed? And interestingly enough, even a word which means something in particular ended up becoming a grammatical little unit right there. Okay? In fact, this is happening all in front of our eyes, right? If you don't know a piece of information nowadays, the thing you would do is you would go and Google it, right? In a few short years, a word which meant a very large number ended up becoming a proper noun for a company, ended up becoming a verb. Okay? Which tells you something. Okay? That frequency-based accounts not only do account for how we might potentially learn languages, it also accounts for language development. Okay? How language actually develops. Here's a question for you. Could it also explain why learning a second language is difficult? Okay? Think about it. Why might learning a second language be difficult? Because you just don't have the frequency you have with the other one, right? Okay? There's a reason why Laurie has invited John Potts back here every single year. It's because he knows all the answers, okay? So when he talks, you listen to him, okay? It's because you don't have the same frequencies, okay? And because the frequencies in your first language have become so strong and so entrenched, it's much harder for a different configuration to come in. Okay? In fact, at birth, we can hear the phones in every single language out there in the world. Okay? But within about from 6 months to about 12 months, we start stopping to hear the sounds that are not in our first language. Okay? Because as Herbert was saying yesterday, in our brain we do pruning. Okay? And it's a massively efficient machine such that, you know, if these are not going to be used, I'm just going to ditch them because they're, you know, they're occupying empty space here. I could use this for better purposes. Okay? So it becomes a lot harder to learn a second language because the brain is a massively efficient thing. Okay? So let me come up with an interim conclusion here. There are people who propose that there is a grammatical device in your head, sort of like a black box. Except we know that, you know, when there are air crashes, you know, quite often the black box is never found. Okay? On the other hand, you know, how do we learn to play chess? Oh, if you play 10,000 hours, they say, you know, you become good at chess. How do you get good at golf? With lots of frequency, you become very good at golf. How do you get good at the piano? With lots of frequency, you become good at the piano. How you learn a language? With lots of frequency, you become good at learning a language. Okay, so between those two explanations, tell me which one you think is more convincing. Okay, well, in fact, I think it's not completely convincing yet because you'll say, but wait, if you order in the next 15 minutes, you get something more. Okay, there's actually a question you might ask, you know, if frequency is all there is to it, why is it that, after listening to my iPad for so long, my iPod for so long, I have not yet become Beyonce, okay? To which potentially the answer is that, if you listen to it that long, you'll know all the lyrics, but, becoming Beyonce is something else, okay? Well, yes, there is a physical dimension to it, but let's leave it for that for the moment, okay? Here's an interesting experiment that was conducted with 11-month-old babies. So these are American babies, very cute, 11 months old, and some of them were only exposed to English, and then they were given a test of Chinese phonology. Okay, horrible nowadays, right? They make them take tests. The young, earlier and earlier. Okay, this is a very interesting test. It's an ingenious one where it's the head turning test to see, which side sounds come from to figure out whether they got the correct one or not. Okay, and there were these similar American babies who were exposed to Chinese lessons. I think an hour or something each day. And then they were also given a Chinese phonology test. Okay, and these are the results. Okay, the ones who only heard English got them 55% correct 55% of the time, and the ones who were exposed to Chinese got it correct 65% of the time. Okay, and that's statistically significant. And in fact, if you want to compare it, there are Chinese babies who only been exposed to Chinese and were given the Chinese phonology test, and they also just got it 65% of the time. Okay? But there's a catch. Here's the catch. American babies, 65% of the time after having been exposed to Chinese, they got this result only when they go into the women's toilet. No, it's only when it's delivered by their mother or some other person. When it's actually delivered by a TV or some audio-visual device, the effect is not there. Okay? Take a minute to talk to the next person why you think that might be. Right, can I hear your answers? Why do you think this is the case? So babies are more used to human voices because that's what they've heard more of? No. It's harder to figure out what those other noises are about. Okay. Okay. Human babies do develop in a very known sequence in terms of being able to follow the gaze as well. And that gives extra information, multisensory. Anything else? Yeah, because, the way we say things matters, right? Oh, poor baby. Oh, they convey different information. Anything else? Okay, quite possibly, but because emotions is the subject of the next talk, I will lay off of it. Okay, one final one. At the back, Karen? So communication for survival. Yeah, communication, okay? And I did not plant that person in the audience, but speaking of primally and survival, wow, we're in the jungle now. And of course, I am an intrepid explorer in the jungle, and I'm in there and I hide myself to spy on the natives. And while I'm in there trying to spy on the natives, something hops into view. And suddenly the natives shout very loudly, "Gavagai!" What does Gavagai mean? Ah, very interesting. Some of you immediately said rabbit, but some of you said the man in a hat. Could there be other possibilities? Pardon? What's that? Food, danger, and so on and so forth, okay? There's no way of actually knowing which of these meanings actually is the right one. Okay, how do you know which one is the right one? Well, what happens next? Let's try that. What happens next? Lots of things need to happen, okay? And we don't really have time to get into this, but if the next thing that happens could be they run away, and that will still leave you quite a few possible options, right? Or if they do eat it, there's still several possible options. If they eat it, it could still mean rabbit, and it could still mean food, right? Do you get my point? Yeah, if you actually want to be able to figure out what that word is, you basically need, in an ideal world, someone to actually point it out to you. Okay? In fact, a very specific feedback to say, when I say Gavagai, this is what it is. Okay? In fact, do you know what happens in your brain when you see someone get injured? By now you should know that the correct answer to this is some part of your brain lights up. Okay, so let's say someone gets cut and something lights up in your brain. And do you know what happens in your brain when you cut yourself? The same part of your brain lights up. Very interesting. Okay. For that matter, do you know why we gossip? I love this. I've asked the question somewhere else, and someone said, because it's fun. In fact, I like better the explanation of the sociologists who say the reason why we gossip is because it enables us to find what are acceptable social norms without having to go through the pain of making the mistake, right? So, did you see what she wore to the dinner last night? And then you quickly realize, okay, I'm not supposed to wear something that looks like that at the dinner in the horse riding stables because that's not acceptable. Okay? How does a baby learn? With some other human. How do you learn about Gavagai? With some other human. How do you learn about what does the brain things going on about getting hurt say? We're very in tune with other people. Okay, gossip. We care about other human beings, right? In other words, a lot of learning language is not just things happening in our brain, because there is a lot of that, the frequency information, but there's also a social component to it. Okay. So here's my next question. If you put them together, what do you get? Pardon? You get Switzerland? Where did, the flag. Anyone with less nationalistic answers? I have someone who does not live in Switzerland waving at the back. Thank you very much. There's a socio element and there's a cognitive element. And so what you get is that language learning inside our heads and whatnot is actually a socio-cognitive process. And therefore, if you want to teach someone the language and if you want to test someone that language, what particular approach should you take in developing your syllabuses? You would want to take a socio-cognitive approach, okay? Because it's not just a black box. In fact, I'd like to suggest that what you think about learners and how we learn matters a lot. Okay? So for example, if you think in terms of black boxes, you think that learning a language is automatic. That faculty is there, you just need to have some exposure and you learn it immediately. Whereas if you think that it's actually frequency tuned, you never really know when it might actually get learned and so on and so forth. How do you think this might actually make you teach in a different way? Well, if you think it's all automatic, then all I need to do is to transmit it, right? I transmit it, I give you the input, and you end up learning it. And so you have a more didactic classroom where you have a more linear sequence of activities because you've received the input, and so you're going to be fine. Whereas if you understand that learning is more emergent and you don't know when it will tip over from Sears Tower to Sears, what you end up doing in your classroom is to come up with several different more redundant types of lessons where you go back to certain things after having paused for a while so that they realize that, oh, we're coming back to this, this must be important, and therefore it aids in someone actually learning. Okay? Some people think there is a grammar-specific module, and there are people who think that, in fact, what we store in our heads are various constructions, that is, this is the sound, this is the word, this is the action, and so on and so forth. How might that change the way you teach language? Well, if you think there's a grammar-specific module, you'll focus on grammar in isolation from other things. You would never think of the multisensory activities that Herbert tried to do, because that would just be frivolous. That would just be a teacher who didn't prepare and so was trying to put on a shtick for the class. On the other hand, if you understand that we store constructions, then you won't necessarily privilege one unit over another. Okay? One unit of language over another, because you realize that our brains actually store in many different kinds of units. I love this particular study done by Ron Martinez. He has two texts which are actually exactly the same in terms of the words in them. Except, if you look at this, all the words are single word versions, whereas in this particular versions are all the formulae and the chunks. Okay? About me, I'm living large. I've been around the block a few times. That's more figurative, and I think I make a pretty good living on the whole, but that's neither here nor there, which is another chunk there, if you don't know any better, etc. By and large is a chunk right there, and so on and so forth. Okay? So these are all single words. These are all formulae and chunks, and so on. Okay? When they actually ask the students to figure out what their reported comprehension is, for the first test, they say, I understand it this much. For the second test, they understand it this much. But when you actually tested them on whether they understood things, well, they're pretty good with the first test, but they actually were some way away on the second test. Okay? Because the words seem transparent in the chunks, by and large. I understand by, I understand and I understand large, but they didn't realize that they didn't understand what by and large meant. Okay? They understand living and they understand large, but they don't know what living large means. Okay? When you realize that our brains work in chunks of different size, then maybe you'll end up teaching in a slightly different way. Okay? We also all know this, that, you know, if someone's, here's skill level and here's content difficulty. If you teach someone who's very weak and give them very difficult content, what's going to happen? They're going to get confused, right? And over here, if they're very good and you give them very easy content, they're going to get bored. And therefore, what we need to do in the classroom, we know, is something here in the middle. Okay? This is very familiar to all of us. Okay? In fact, some of us have heard this called Krashen's I+1. Some of us might have heard this as Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. And on the surface, they actually look similar. But in fact, they're very different, because Krashen thinks that it's all about input, and output does not actually matter. Okay? Vygotsky's zone of proximal development is about someone interacting with someone else, so that in the process of interacting, in your output, you end up testing ideas about whether language is correct or not, and that's actually how you learn. You see how that will change your classroom practice. In fact, you remember what Herbert said yesterday about practice tests. It's one of the highest utility things, but it tends to work better only when the responses are? Is it when they just see the correct answer, or is it when they actually have to produce it? It's when they actually have to produce it, right? If this theory is correct, then merely being able to recognize things would be enough. But if this is correct, then producing the thing is how you actually learn. And in fact, we know producing it is how you learn, so this is probably correct. Finally, this one is concerned with competence. This one is concerned with performance. Okay? So if you end up subscribing to this school of thought, and you're just trying to figure out whether they know the grammatical structures, what kinds of tests will you end up with? You'll end up with recognition tests where, you know, do they know whether this grammatical structure is correct? Okay? You'll end up with all the multiple choice tests that you had in the United States quite a few years ago. On the other hand, if you subscribe to this particular school of thought and think it's about performance, what kinds of tests do you come up with? You come up with speaking tests like we have in Cambridge, where it's a person talking to another person, because it's about performance and not just about competence. What you think about learning matters a great deal. Okay. So let's summarize, because I think my time is just about up. Okay. What you think about learners matter. How they learn, because it will change the way you go about teaching. And as we learned yesterday, what you think about teaching matters as well. If you think about it in terms of simple transmission, you'll teach in a particular way. And if you think it's about learning-oriented, then you'll teach in a different way. Okay? So if you're able to just slightly change your thinking about how we learn and about how we teach, then we will have gone some way towards learning-oriented assessment. Thank you very much.